love when Asha does her new songs.
Yes.
We are so blessed. Thank you. That was really nice.
Thank you.
I just finished writing that. That was great. Change. You know, it's funny how I pick my topics. I just kind of tend to wander around wondering what I think people would like to hear. Which is one reason it's going to be great to do some series, because it lets us know what's coming. But I want to talk about what matters. And what has been striking me lately is that we are always in seasons of change. There is so much going on in our lives. It happens so fast. And last week, we explored the Easter and the Passover stories of renewal and rebirth and transformation. Those are great metaphors for learning those lessons, and I'm going to carry them forward a little bit here again today. What we got last week is we saw that the possibilities of resurrection are always with us. We are a people wired for hope, for renewal, for rebirth. It's just how we think. Don't you notice that? If you're like me, even when things happen that are bad, I kind of go, whoa, something just happened that was bad. And then I think, well, there's a good possibility of something good coming out of this. We just always continue to hope. Thank God that is in our DNA. It is in our consciousness. It's just the way we are. But as Asha pointed out, and as we discussed last week, change can sometimes be scary. It can be challenging. It can really set us back. We often resist it. We want consistency. We want predictability. I was talking to my wife, and I said, I'm going to be talking about change. What do you think I should talk about? And she goes, well, just talk about how we hate it. Talk about how we just don't like, this tells you a whole lot about my marriage, but we just don't like change. We just kind of block it. It's part of it is we think life is just hard enough without new things popping up. It's just hard enough. So what I want to do for today is I just want to talk through how we manage change, and not just how we manage it, how we prosper through it, how we grow through it. If you look at the front of your bulletins, there's a quote that talks about the winds of change. And it says, some people build walls and other people build windmills. We want to be windmill builders. We want to be people who prosper through the power of change. We want to preserve our joy, our inner peace, and our ability to shine our lights, which is why we're here, in the midst of the change that comes to us through our very human experiences. One of the first perceptions I had when I was working on this talk is that change is happening way too much and way too fast. Does anyone else think that? I once said to my mother years ago, I said, are things really worse now, or do they just seem worse? And she goes, oh no, they're really worse. But change, it just happens so fast. I mean, if you're a student of history, for hundreds of years, people lived the same as their predecessors did. If your father was a farmer, you were a farmer. Your son was going to be a farmer. You were born, you lived, and you died within a 50-mile radius, within the same town. Everybody you saw in the course of a day was very likely somebody you knew and had known for many years. That's not the way it is nowadays. I'm surprised if I meet anybody who is even from here. Let's see a show of hands. How many people are from the Atlanta area? Oh my God. That would be no one. Okay.
Well, you are.
I am.
Okay, we see one hand back there. How many people in the room have moved at least twice over the course of their lives? Look at this. I mean, yeah, okay. All right, 3 times over the course of their lives. This is way fun. 4 times.
Wait, are you talking geographic?
Geographic. Yeah, geographic. How many people have moved at least 5 times over the course of their lives? Okay, look at this. I think we've said enough. I mean, we live in a world of constant change. About 15 years ago, I was on a plane flying out to California from, wherever I was, East Coast to West Coast. And I was sitting next to this little old lady. I still remember her. Her name was Mrs. Williams, and we started talking. And she told me that when she was about 6, she and her sister had crossed the United States in a covered wagon. I am not making this up. And here we were sitting in, 4E and F. I mean, imagine that. I mean, it was just, sometimes Sometimes when my dad was alive, he died in 2010, I used to make jokes because he could not understand his computer. He would be one of these guys who every time something popped up, he would buy it. You know, like God knows. Okay, he would have about 30 Internet Explorer screens open at the same time. Click, 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 click. And I always used to laugh. I don't do that anymore. Because I cannot even imagine what I am not going to be able to understand, to program, to turn on and off in 20 or 30 years. I am learning humility now. Because I cannot even imagine what I'm not going to be able to do then. In addition to the pace of technological change, how about information change? How about the sheer volume of information that we receive every day? It's overwhelming. If you think about how our brains are wired, we're kind of wired cognitively the same way that our ancestors were, who were kind of running around the grasslands hoping that whatever was chasing them didn't eat them. You know, now we're called upon to multitask. We're called upon to do 12 things at the same time. Multitasking, by the way, doesn't work. I've said this before, but I read an article in the Wall Street Journal. It was called "Multitasking Makes You Stupid." And it does. We can't do it. But that's what we're required to do. We only really do one thing well. We cannot do 2 or 3 things well. One authority I read in preparing for this talk, I was doing some research on how the information world has just exploded. One authority said that we've created more information in the last 10 years than in all of human history before that. In the last 10 years, more information than in all of human history. Thanks in large part to the growth of digital technology, Americans have taken in 5 times as much information every day in 2011 as they did in 1986. I mean, think about that. And we're still the same little tired brains. As a matter of fact, I wasn't going to tell you this because it's way depressing. I did some research which suggested that as we continue to evolve, our brains are shrinking. Okay, so more information, shrinking brains, this adds up to not just good news. Our personal devices also get in the way. Okay, everybody here has a cell phone. Think about, I'm going to be talking for about 20 minutes. Think about how many emails you're going to get, texts you're going to get, phone calls you're going to get, just as we're all sitting here in the next 20 minutes. An email comes in, an hour later you get another one asking why you haven't answered it. Right? How often does that happen? Yes. Excuse me, I'm having a life here, excuse me. You get a text, beep, somebody expects you to text them back immediately no matter what you're doing. You get a phone call. It's just a world of immediate response. And what's also the way our brains work is when we hear a ping, we're instantly drawn to it. No matter if there's a real, actual person in front of us. You know, I'm sharing a problem with somebody, ping, excuse me, I've got to see what this total stranger wants. So, yeah, I mean, we are living in a world of information overload. I just saw an ad for the new iWatch. Have you guys seen an ad for the new iWatch? Have you seen it? Okay, somebody was describing it to me. She was actually happy about this. She says it goes on your wrist and every time something happens, it pulses. 1 pulse for a text, 2 for an email. I'm like, oh my God. I got enough problems. I don't need things pulsing at me. So, yeah, we live in a world of information overload. Sometimes I think about the days when a letter would arrive. Remember when letters were not just junk or bills? We'd get an actual letter, and we would get a day or so to think about it and to ponder a response. That's not anymore. We live our lives in constant state of response to other people, to other events. And our challenge is, how do we continue our growth? How do we continue to live as human beings in the midst of all this? I think one of the reasons that we have such difficulty handling this is because we have so much to manage. We keep so many different balls in the air. When something changes or someone throws a new one at us, we just shut down. I do that because there is so much going on. I just go into tilt. Does anybody else do that? There's just, no, I just can't do it. Not one more thing. So we have resistance. Next week, Jeannie Ward is going to talk about resistance because it's a topic that deserves its own talk. What is the nature of resistance? How do we get past resistance? What does it mean? That's going to be the topic for next week. So, as we consider change, how do we manage our equilibrium in the midst of near constant change? We are spiritual beings having a very human experience. So what lessons can we bring to bear on how we manage change? Because we don't want to just manage it. We want to prosper through it. We want to grow through it. We want to come out stronger and better and deeper and more loving at the other end. We want to be windmill builders. We don't want to put up walls because, as we know, when we put up walls, if the wind blows hard enough, they fall down. Windmills don't. So my first thought, as we manage change, as we try to prosper with change, is we need to remember our own power in the face of change, in the face of changing events. All too often, and we were talking about this today in class, all too often when change happens, when new circumstances arrive, our reaction is that it is something that's happening to us, that we are victims, that we're just kind of sitting there and something horrible happens. How often do you say, or does someone else say that you hear, "You wouldn't believe what happened to me today"? Well, when something happens to you, it's a two-part thing. First is the event that happens. Second is our ability to choose how we're going to think about it, to choose how we're going to react to it, to choose what opportunities we see in it. All too often we neglect the second part. We sit there and we say, "Oh my God, what just happened to me?" And then we panic. But we have a choice. Because one thing we know, especially here at One World, is that we have the opportunity to choose how we think about what happens to us. Our first situation might be panic. But then we choose what happens next, where we put our focus, what thoughts we entertain, what actions we take. The first thing we have learned to do is to breathe. We take a look at what is in front of us. As Kayleen read, we don't put our heads in the sand. We realize that there may be a pearl of opportunity in what's going on in front of us. How often have you received news or had a life change, and the first thing you do, if you're anything like me, is, okay, this has happened, and then we load it up with assumptions, with judgments, with fears. We catastrophize, which is a verb that I really like. This is not helpful. What has happened is an event, but we just load the wagon with so many things onto the top of this event. As Mark Twain says, one of my favorite quotes that he's quoted as saying, "My life has been filled with tragedies, most of which never happened."
Right.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Yes, we do it to ourselves. I am so good at this. I could be teaching a class just on that. There's an ancient Taoist teaching by Li Zhu. It's a great story, and I'm going to tell it to you briefly. I just love it. It's called The Axe Thief. Has anyone heard that story? Once upon a time, a man had a beautiful, well-made axe, which he just loved. One day, he couldn't find his axe. That's the fact. He couldn't find his axe. He suspected his neighbor's son, and he began to observe his neighbor's son. Everything about his observations led him to conclude that that boy had taken his axe. His facial expression was that of a thief. His conversation was that of a thief. Everything, the way he moved, confirmed the fact that he had taken his man's axe. Everything distinctively showed that he was the thief. Sometime afterward, the man was digging in his garden, and he looked over to his left and he saw a glint of metal. It was his axe. He had just mislaid it. The next time he saw his neighbor's son, there was nothing about this boy that indicated he was an axe thief. Okay. What a great story. It so well illustrates the point. The fact was that the man could not find his axe. That was the fact. The rest of it is all stuff he piled on. His fears and preconceptions. He saw the boy differently because he filled in the picture with what he assumed to be the case. When he realized that he had merely misplaced it, all of a sudden, wham, things were different. He just saw it differently. Those are the choices we have. We have the choice to fill in or not to fill in, given a particular fact. How often do we do the same thing? You call somebody and leave a message. They don't call you back. Obviously, they don't respect me. They don't like me. They don't care. And then you find out 2 days later it's because they had an illness in the family or a death in the family. Why do we do that? If anyone has any concept as to why they do that, shout it out, but we all do it. The key is awareness. The key is knowing when we're doing it. When I started to learn to catch myself filling in these gaps, my life got a lot easier because I started to ask myself, what actually happened here? And it's a lot more discreet. It's a lot more focused. I lost my axe. She didn't call back. Okay, well, let's wait and see what actually happened. In other words, we have a choice in how we view the events that happen to us. As the Greek philosopher Epictetus said, people are disturbed not by things, but by the view they take of them. We are disturbed not by things, but by the view we take of things. We have the opportunity to select our view. We always do. We have the opportunity to consider how we are going to react to things. We all are familiar with the glass half full, glass half empty image. It's the same glass. We all know people who are glass half empty. No matter what the situation, they're always going to look at it negatively. We also know the flip side. People who always look at it positively. Same glass. Dealing with the changes that life brings to us, learning how to grow through them, is a major lesson that we are here in human form to learn. It's always funny, that's when we ask for help. That's one of the benefits of community. I find that typically we don't ask for help when things are going well. One of the things you're not going to find is a 12-step program for people who are too happy. Hello, my name is Melanie, I'm ecstatic. Hello, Melanie. You don't get that. We ask for help, we reach out, we seek community. A lot of times when things are challenging, that's when we can truly support and love each other. Our growth comes from living through challenging times with the knowledge that we have a choice. We have a part to play in those events. As Eric Butterworth teaches in the quote that Kayleen read, we do not let outer events define how we respond. We remain open to the wisdom that is in all our hearts. Because as Asha is saying, we also know there are some things which do not change. Our connection with Source does not change. Our innate divinity does not change. Our ability to call on the help which is always right here never changes. As Anne Lamott says in her book, Help, Thanks, Wow, sometimes all we have to do is just say help. And I find myself doing that. Sometimes things get so dark, I just say, help. And it helps. So that's my first thought. Let's remain aware of the power we have and the choices we can make in the process of change. My second thought is to explore the process of transition. Last week, we started this inquiry using Easter as a metaphor. We explored the process of ending, transition, or resting and renewal. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We learned that you don't get to the renewal on Sunday until you have the ending on Friday and the renewal, the resting, the time of transition, which occurs on Saturday. The resurrection on Easter could not happen without the ending and the period on Saturday in between. It's a process, one that we frequently shortchange. One of the things I want to talk about today is the need to honor and observe the process so that we can come out well the other end. As I was getting ready for this, I was looking at a book by William Bridges called Managing Transitions. And he teaches that there's a distinction between change and between transitions. Change is the outcome. We get a new job. We move. We get a divorce. Those are outcomes. Transition is the process between where we are and where we get there. It begins with an ending. You are always, any process of change ends with something leaving and something stopping. We leave the old situation behind. The first secret in achieving healthy change is realizing and honoring the process of transition, not change. We're so interested in jumping into the new thing that a lot of times we don't honor the process of transition. And that is what the Easter metaphor teaches us. We often overlook it. Think about your own life. We moved here, this is just an example. We moved here in 1996. We still had 3 kids, they were like 3, 4, and 5. And we moved from a townhouse in Virginia, which was a lot smaller, to a bigger house in Roswell. And we were so excited. We thought the kids would just love it because they, back in Virginia, they didn't have a playground. They had little rooms. There wasn't room to play. It was this, we uploaded all our assumptions about this townhouse on how they would feel about it. We thought they would love the bigger backyard, the playground, the front yard. And so we didn't really honor the fact that they were leaving their townhouse. So we get to Atlanta, we show them this beautiful new house, and they hated it. We're like, what? All they said for 2 years was we missed the townhouse. And it's because we hadn't honored the transition. Because they missed what they had, even though we thought it was bigger, better, brighter, more playful. It didn't matter. We didn't honor the fact that they were still leaving something. That they were moving into something new, which might be fun and might be bright and might be wonderful. But we didn't honor the fact that they loved what they had. Here in this country, especially, we are so interested in moving from A to B. We just jump. We think change, we sometimes conflate change with progress. We don't honor the transitions. One of the things Bridges says in his book, Managing Transitions, is that in what he calls the transition phase, he calls it the neutral zone, is the time of creativity. It's the time of resting. It's the time when we just regather our energies for the renewal that's going to come. And one of the things I suggest that we need to do in managing change is honor that process. When you go to a new job, when you go to a new home, take time to think about what it is you're leaving. Take time to honor what you have loved about where you've been. And respect that process in others. All it calls for is awareness. And that, it seems so funny whenever I give a talk, I always start with be aware. Because it's the first step. As we move from A to B all the way through to Z, you need to be aware and conscious of what is going on about you, what you're leaving, what you liked about it, what you're going to, what values you leave behind, what values you're moving to. It all starts with mindfulness and awareness and taking the time to realize that things are changing, even when they're good changes. Like in our example, it was a good change, it was a good move, but there was still sadness and loss in it. Don't ignore the importance of the Saturdays, the 40 years in the wilderness, the time in the tomb. It's not wasted time. It's good transition time, and we need to honor it. What William Bridges says about transition, he says, it's not the changes that get you, it's the transitions. And what gets you about it is when we forget them. So those are 2 points which I think are important to consider as we look at change. The first is realize the power we have in making our own choices. Honor the process and realize that what is valuable is unchanging. I think it was Swami Muktananda that said, that which is real is unchanging. And that's our connection to God, our love for each other, our support for others, and our willingness to be of service in the world. Those are values which do not change. So change is a good thing. It can be a scary thing, but at the end of the day, as Eric Butterworth said, we can still continue to find the pearls in the challenges. So let's take these thoughts into meditation.